Elizabeth Karlsen and Christine Vachon, talk about how you brought Carol to the big screen as producers of the film.
With great passion and a lot of hard work. The sort of nuts and bolts of the story are that we made a film together about 12 years ago called Mrs. Harris, and Phyllis Naj was the writer and director, and Phyllis had approached me about doing Carol, which is a project that she had been attached to for some time, and for whatever reason it never got off the ground, and she said, I really want to do this, are you interested? And I loved it. I actually hadn't read the book. She introduced me to it, but I knew Patricia Highsmith's Ripley worked very well. And I loved it and wanted to make it, but there was a slight hitch, which was the rights to the novel were tied up and elsewhere. And so it took 11 years before those rights became free. And the second they became free, I pursued them with the aggression of a small terrier, and returned to Phyllis and said, Phyllis, I have the rights, let's make it. And Phyllis said, I can't. I've had my heart broken too many times for more than a decade, and I just don't have the strength to go back there. So my leverage was to her, well, you're either with me or you're without me. And if you're without me, I'm going to make it anyway. And so she thought about it for a second, and she said, you know what, I'll make it with you. And then there was a series of couple of false starts. And then we had a director on board. We had Cate Blanchett on board, and then it all fell apart. And I was on the phone to Christine, who has been a very, very long friend, and we've made short films together and Mrs. Harris together, and I'm a huge admirer of hers. And we were both kind of bemoaning the state of our projects. And I was talking to her about my directorless project, and she was talking to me about Todd's film, which didn't look like it was going to go. And as we had this conversation, I think Christine was like, maybe we should send Carol to Todd. And that was, I think he got it in May 2011, and we were in pre-production in February 2012. So there, in a nutshell, that was it. That's the sort of nuts and bolts, but actually making it was a a story of, blood, sweat.
Let's talk a bit about making it. What were some of those experiences like?
Well, Todd is, he's an extraordinarily meticulous filmmaker. Like many of our movies, Carol's eyes were too big for its stomach, and it was a very challenging budget. Given Todd's perfectionism, which obviously shows in the film in the most, beautiful and exhilarating ways. But it wasn't easy to get that out of, the limited dollars that we had.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a challenge for a producer when you're working with a director like Todd Haynes, who I think on this film is top of his game, and it's an extraordinarily beautiful film that also has a narrative that resonates on so many levels, as a fantastic love story, and also the politics with a small p of the piece. But it's a film by Todd Haynes, and when we brought the finance for the film together, that's certainly what you are saying to the distributors around the world, is this is what we are going to deliver to you. And Todd was able to attract the likes of, Sandy Powell, who has a sack full of Oscars, and Judy Becker, and Ed Lachman, and Alfonso. I mean, really behind the camera HODs who are extraordinary talents. And there is no point in having those people on board and having a film by Todd Haynes, unless as producers you can enable those people to do their best work and to deliver a film which is a Todd Haynes film. So, you're kind of keeping your eye on the line items, but you're also thinking, I need to make the right choices so that Todd has as much as we can possibly provide him with, so he can produce one of his finest pieces of work. And I think we got it right.
Well, you're working on top of all this, you're working with period as well. You've got period cars and period locations. So talk about some of the challenges of that. Where did you start? Where did you find this stuff?
Well, with period, we always say you pay by the yard. And but really, one of the things that helped us enormously was the city of Cincinnati. which is where we shot the film. And it helped us on two levels. One was Cincinnati had, it was also built on a grid system like New York City, and it had block after block of very unchanged, buildings and storefronts. But the other thing is that the city itself was so happy to have us there that they kind of went the extra mile.
Yeah, they did. And it was really fortuitous because we, my partner, Stu Miller, and I had actually made a film in Cincinnati over 25 years ago. And just in the back of my head, I thought, oh, there's no way it's going to look like it did 25 years ago. It's a movie called Rage in Harlem that was set in Harlem in the 50s. Mm-hmm. And when the line producer produced the first budget for us that was set in New York, we quickly realized that that was so far out of our price range that we were trying to regroup. And you kind of say to the line producer, well, just cut the budget, cut the budget by $10 million. I mean, it was literally by about $10 million.
Absolutely.
So of course they produced something that works on paper, but then it was a dilemma of where you're going to shoot it. And I was on a phone call, I think, with a line producer and someone else. I was Googling at the same time. I thought, I'll just Google Cincinnati and see if there's any pictures, which of course 25 years ago you could not put a film together by Googling images. Mm-hmm. And it looked pretty great, but the other thing was they had this incredible tax incentive. So it was sort of the perfect storm of creative and financial opportunity that city provided. And like Christine said, the city really rallied around the movie and bent over backwards to help us.
Mm-hmm. Now, Christine, you've worked with Todd Haynes really almost throughout his entire career. You probably know better than anybody what his process is like and how it's changed over the years. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about that sort of in depth.
Well, I mean, his process, I suppose, I'm trying to think if it's actually changed over the years, but I think he's always had, the ability to really get under the surface of what he's trying to, certainly what he's trying to say in each frame, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, at risk of sounding insanely pretentious, he's kind of a master of the mise en scène, mm-hmm. of what's in the frame and why it's there. He does a lookbook that is not just a lookbook for the film as a whole, but it contains images for every single scene so that all the heads of department know exactly the palette that they're working with. And it really helps create that kind of internal integrity that makes the filmmaking so strong. So, I mean, this is, I think Carol, he's done some of his finest work, although, obviously I'm partial to every single one of his movies. Mm-hmm. And, he's never actually been nominated as a director. Mm-hmm. He was nominated as a screenwriter for Far From Heaven, but he's never actually gotten the Best Director nomination.
I know. I know better than anyone as well.
Yes, right.
Well, let's talk about awards, because I mean, this film is being talked about for awards. I think it could be the first time that he gets nominated for directing. Certainly, Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara are in the conversation, as are yourselves for producing the film and all of your department heads. Can you talk a bit about what awards mean for a film like this, kind of a smaller, more intimate film?
Yeah, I mean, the awards mean a huge amount for a small, intimate film like this. I mean, not only because you cannot help but feel so gratified and so thrilled that it's getting this kind of a recognition, because, it was hard to package it together. It was hard for financial reasons. It was hard creatively, all of that stuff. The film did have a very, very long gestation period that we were sort of a part of and kind of not a part of, but it's been under our skin for, over a decade. So there's that level, but also for a film like this to really travel on an international level, these awards mean huge amounts. And Todd hasn't had a film yet that's been a big box office success, and it is a film which stars two female characters. Those characters are gay. So I think that the kudos that those awards can give this film means huge amounts, both in terms of your reputation, your work, but also the potential to get a large audience. And not just in America, I mean, certainly internationally. These awards mean a lot in Europe and throughout the rest of the world. So yeah, it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
If we get there.
Right, if we get there.
Well, I think you have a strong chance. Speaking as someone who analyzes awards, you know, let's talk a bit more about the socio-political aspects of this film. You know, because even though the events are 50 or 60 years removed, you know, it's still an issue today. You know, very much so for people like Carol and Therese to be together, even though the Supreme Court has legalized gay marriage in all 50 states. There's still a lot of people who are opposed to that. You know, and so, you know, how can a film like Carol really help in that conversation?
Well, I guess, you know, I read today in the paper this morning that a lesbian couple in Utah who were in the process of adopting a child had the child taken away from them by a judge who said he believed that children shouldn't live with same-sex parents, period. And everyone was stunned at the decision. So, so you're right. It's not like we can all pat ourselves on the back. I think that what happens in Carol is, I think you identify very strongly with the desire that both characters are feeling, and that, you know, that obviously transcends any kind of discourse based purely on gender and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the sort of huge achievements of the film, you know, that we're starting with Patricia Highsmith, but Phyllis and Todd, is that it is first and foremost a love story, and it's a beautifully told love story that resonates so deeply. And I think that probably because of that, because it's not an issue movie, you would hope that there is an emotional level that people will respond that somehow might possibly break down, you know, barriers that exist towards acceptance, because, you know, they're not bad people. I mean, that line of Cate Blanchett's when she says, "Harsh, if we go to court, it will get ugly, and we're not ugly people." And I think that's such a seminal line in this film that speaks universally to people, and they aren't ugly people. You know, they are people who have desires and who have basic human needs of love and caring. And I think that it, you know, it's a love story, and that's its strength.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the power from it derives from the ending of the movie. You know, it doesn't end on a note of tragedy and loss.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it ends on a note of triumph in a way. You know, was that important?
Yeah, I think it's kind of amazing that even today that is of note in like gay and lesbian love stories. You know, there aren't that many. You could count the films on the fingers of one hand that don't end up in a suicide, a murder, some element of self-loathing. And of course, it was so outrageous when Patricia Highsmith wrote it that that was one of the reasons where it was forced underground, and she wrote under a pseudonym because it was just scandalous that it would have had a happy ending.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, going back to Todd Haynes again, he's been so important in telling these kinds of stories, you know, about, you know, not just gay people, but all people who are sort of, you know, I don't want to say disenfranchised, but, you know, looked at as sort of like
on the outside.
Yes, at odds with society, you know, in telling stories and making their plights universal, you know. I mean, identifiable with other people, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think that what Todd said is interesting, because he said that he prefers to explore characters who are almost incarcerated by a set of social mores, because it's how you can live your life with those kind of restrictions being imposed creates for more complexity in a character. And I think that that is very true, and certainly with both the characters of Therese and Carol, you know, they're really compelling and interesting women in this film because of that, if you want to call it a kind of social incarceration.
Right. Well, it's a great movie, and I
Yeah.
wish you the best of luck with it. And thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thanks.